The background today is very purple.
Yeah,
There's the purple background.
That is so pretty. No wonder.
I hope nobody, or is anybody in here purple colorblind?
Is that purple or pink though?
No, that's blue. I'm not purple.
No? Okay. I don't know if that's even a thing, but I thought if it was, I'd better mention that's purple.
Green is the thing.
I think
Was it red green?
I think I'm green and blue colorblind.
I saw this video one time. If there are these glasses that will help people overcome color blindness, they came out with them, and they're really neat. Apparently people who are colorblind can actually see colors. It's like something about the way the colors are sent to the eyes by reality is not properly interpreted by the brain. So it's actually, I think, a neurological issue. Colorblindness is not an eye issue. I don't know if that's true in all cases.
A lot of colorblind cases are.
A lot of them are? Okay, so I think it's you have to like go on their website and you have to take a test, and then they tell you whether or not they have glasses that'll help you based on your taking the test. And then they send the glasses in. I think they're called chromatid or chroma key glasses, something like that. And like I've watched so many videos of these people. They get their chroma glasses in and they put them on. And in fact, remind me later when I'm explaining the stick figure drawing behind me to mention these glasses again. It's very similar to what you're seeing here. But these people, they put their glasses on for the first time. I saw this one guy is like, well, somebody bought me these glasses from work. They all pitched in because they're like $200 or $300 glasses, I think, maybe $500. So I'm gonna put them on, and they asked me to record video when I first put them on. So he puts them on, and he's just like, "What?" Like he's just looking around like he's a kid again. He's walking up to flowers, and I think purple was his thing. He was like, "Is this purple?" Like, and it was just like crying. I'm sitting there like, "Oh, it's so beautiful." He's like hugging his kids. It's like he's like, "I love your shirt." It was so sweet. But today we're talking about poetry.
How did we get here?
Huh?
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Well, you're going to wonder the same thing later when we get here. Assuming that I do the same thing with the stick figure drawing.
Yeah.
And the guys and the shadows and this opening in the river and the sun outside. But that will come later. Gentlemen. Gentlemen. We're doing poetry.
That's when we're talking. I'm sorry. I don't usually talk in class.
All right, here we go.
I'm sorry.
Now, poetry, I ask the question here of poetry, is it necessary to be afraid?
Yes.
No.
You're admittedly afraid of poetry. Well, some of you may not be admitting you're afraid of poetry, and some of you might be afraid of poetry.
Why should you be?
It can be intimidating, and I'm aware of that. The first thing I want to show you is don't forget about the labs on Blackboard. They always sneak up. Week 13, day 2.
Is that after or before spring break?
That is way after spring break. They're due basically the week after the research paper is due. Yeah, so a lot of people would be like, but I was planning on using the week after the research paper to turn in my research paper because I didn't turn it in when it was due. Which is not the way you should approach things. But if that is the case, then you'll be really crammed for time on the labs. So remember, like you only have to do the graded quizzes themselves. You can do the practice quizzes if you want to see if you can test the water and know if you can pass the quiz. Additionally, you don't have to do the lessons, but if you feel more comfortable doing all the lessons, the videos and stuff, and then going into the practice quiz, then the quiz.
I have a problem with getting a really good grade on the practice quiz and then doing the actual quiz and like losing like at least 10 points more than I did on the practice quiz.
Is it some scenario? I mean, I don't think they're quite as bad, whereas it's like something like where the practice quiz is like, what's 2 plus 2? And you're like, 4. And then the real quiz is like, what's the derivative of x? You know, if it's a limit of r, is, you're like, well, I don't know.
It's not that
That's what I'm doing right now. I would know that answer to that.
It's like exactly, like it feels almost exactly the same. Yeah, there might even be just minor differences between 1301 and 1302. What was your question?
Is that how they're going to be graded, kind of like they were
Same as
last
1301.
Yeah, they'll be graded like the way they were last semester for those who are familiar with that. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of the semester how they're graded in this class as well, which it kind of works the same. So that's something to keep in mind because we have research paper coming up, and that's going to take up a lot of your time from the moment it's assigned to the time it's due.
What week is it, just out of curiosity?
Week 13, day 2 is the time that
Today's
the labs are due.
Okay.
Today's week 7, day 1.
It's 7?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
so-
week 7.
It's 6
I
weeks
thought it
until
was
week
7.
13, day 1. If you don't count spring
must
break,
have
if you
missed
do
it.
count spring break, we have about 7 weeks until the labs are due. Which means we also have about 5 weeks, 6 weeks technically, until the research papers are due, which I'll be assigning next Thursday.
Oh.
But back to poetry. Is it necessary to be afraid? And I thought, let's read and see if it's necessary to be afraid. And I figured the best way of doing that is why not? We'll just jump directly to the most difficult poem of the entire semester.
Is it going to be up there on the screen?
It will not. It's a very big poem, so it's difficult for me to put the entire thing on the screen and remember to flip slides. So, if you'd like to look it up on your phone, you can. If you don't have your book, otherwise just turn the pages in your book and go to it. And that's what I'll be doing, is getting a timer ready. I'm actually going to time myself reading it, because that's going to be relevant to me. It's on 9:48, and if you need to look it up on, say, a phone or something, it's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by Eliot, and it was published in 1917. So that's how you'll know you've. In fact, I think if you just typed in Prufrock on Google, you probably have the poem pop up.
Bartleby has his own website.
Bartleby is actually, it's a website named after Bartleby, but it's a place where they put poetry out that I think is not copyrighted, or like the copyright's expired, or something like that. Which rarely happens anymore. They always find some way of renewing their copyrights. So here we go. I'm going to read this poem out loud. I'm going to time it. We're going to see just how long it takes to read poetry. Heck, even just the longest poem of the entire semester, how long will it take it? Now, there is some Italian in here. I do not speak Italian.
We were wondering what that
You
was.
going to read that for us?
I am going to read it in Italian because it's part of the poem. It's supposed to be read. I don't read Italian, so I'm going to be flubbing and making mistakes, but I will do my best. Now, I'm not going to translate it to nothing. I'm literally just going to read this thing from start to finish, just to see what that's like. And by the way, this may be very frightening. Not like Edgar Allan Poe frightening, but like just frightening in terms of what I just read. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. Se io credesse che mie risposte fosse persone che mai tornassi al mondo, che s'affirma essere senza piscose, ma per ciò che mai di questo fondo, non torno a dire alcun, se io dire vero, senza temere infame ti rispondo. That is the best I can do.
You can do that again.
Well, I cannot. That's the best I've done all day, and it's not going to happen again quite that well.
That's pretty good. That was really good.
Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights and one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. And indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create. And time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me. And time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute, there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. For I have known them all already. Known them all. Have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all. The eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pen, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? And I have known the arms already, known them all. Arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight down with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl? And should I then presume? And how should I begin? Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows? There should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And the afternoon, the evening, sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched on the floor here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short, I was afraid. And would it have been worth it after all, after the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me? Would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. If one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, that is not what I meant at all, that is not it at all. And would it have been worth it? After all, would it have been worthwhile? After the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more? It is impossible to say just what I mean. But as if a magic lantern threw the nerves and patterns on a screen, would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl, and turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all. That is not what I meant at all. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, withal an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse. At times, indeed, almost ridiculous. Almost, at times, the fool. I grow old. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea by seagulls wreathed with seaweed red and brown till human voices wake us, and we drown. Okay, how long did that take? 7 minutes and 38 seconds. That's not too long. And so why is that relevant? I don't know. We'll get to it. So I read it. And now what's so scary about poetry? Many people after first glancing at poetry are very afraid of it. And I think people are afraid of it because they don't understand it, at least not initially. Anybody get that perfectly?
No. No.
No?
Absolutely.
Come on, guys.
Everything.
100%.
I read the whole thing
7 minutes.
They made perfect
in
sense.
7 minutes.
I understand everything except for the very beginning, like the French part. That's all I did.
That's how I went to
Italian,
Google
so
Translate.
you understand even less than you knew.
It's a little rusty.
The French really had me. Oh, well. Had it been there.
I went to Google Translate to see what it said.
What
You
did it
did?
say?
Yeah.
It has the translation down below.
Oh,
I
well.
don't have that. I went
Would
to
you record my voice? Because that wasn't accurate enough.
copy and paste. I was on the phone.
No. So it says to have someone tell you that you will try to understand poetry is one of the most terrifying things because you kind of feel after reading one that you don't know what it means. I think it goes along with that fear of the unknown. I don't really know what I'm supposed to know. There's no way I can get to that, it doesn't seem, so it's kind of frightening. I mean, think about horror films. They're scary, and it's usually not just some guy that you see from the very beginning that's attacking people in normal ways and making normal plays. It's like some element that we don't know what is there. Like it barely shows us the monster, like we only see like a flash of what it looks like. And we're like, but it's never like we get a long look at the bad makeup to help us understand that this is not really a dangerous thing we're looking at. No, it's the fear of the unknown that strings us along. Dark corners, dark rooms. Was that a noise? Where did that come from? It's always like the unknown that scares us. So it's something about not knowing that really scares us, and we don't like being told that we're going to have to try to figure out what's in the dark. And it's essentially like somebody's asking you, walk into that dark room and then discover what's there, and figure it out. And when you figured it out, come back and tell me. It's just like, no, I don't want to do that. I mean, hopefully it will give you some ways to start flipping on switches so it'll make it a little less scary, but it's still going to be a lot up to you. But let's look at this realistically, even though it's somewhat frightening. Poets don't want you to understand their words quickly. It's just, at least in terms of lyric poetry like we read these days, it's just not common that the poet was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write something I want them to get immediately. It's not what they're looking for. The entire point of poetry is to slow you down and to force additional readings. So there's not really anything to be afraid of since you're not supposed to understand a poem the first time through. I mean, heck, Eliot also wrote a poem called The Wasteland, and I'm not even 100% sure that poem's ever meant to be understood. I think it's meant to be so confusing that the confusion is almost part of the point. This one, I think, is actually trying to get you to understand it to a point after a while, and I think after a number of readings, I've got most of it. But still, I'm not 100% sure I understand that entire poem that we just read. But think about realistically as well. Short stories took you far more time than the poems will. The poems may be harder to understand, yes, but they're more quickly digested. And that took 7.5 minutes, but let's look at one of the more average poems you're likely to read. Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry, which I'll also use the timer on. So we can take a screenshot here of the time it took me just a second ago. Reset this. I'm going to read Introduction to Poetry on page 607 by Billy Collins. I believe a former poet laureate of the United States. I don't think he's still the poet laureate. I don't know if we'll ever have another poet laureate because I don't know if that's tied to the Arts Foundation. What is the National Endowment for the Arts? I don't know if that's tied to that.
What happened to it?
Well, I just think that the Republicans very much want to make that go away. Because it doesn't cost very much, but it's still money, so they want to get rid of that. Who needs art? If the Democrats came in and took over the government tomorrow and said we want to get rid of the National Endowment for the Arts, I would have the same problem. So it's not a policy issue. Arts are important to me. It should be to everybody. Billy Collins, Introduction to Poetry, page 607. Oh, I didn't start the timer. I was like, something's different. Okay, here we go. Introduction to Poetry. I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. So that took 43.82 seconds. I think that's the exact same time it took me earlier, even down to milliseconds. So that's 43 seconds took me to read Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry. I mean, what was that roughly about?
I got that one.
Got that one, right? Yeah. So you're reading it, he's like, I want them to just basically experience a poem, and what they end up trying to do is, what do you mean? What do you mean? Tell me. That's all that they're sitting there thinking about. They don't want to experience it for its music or the way it's approaching ideas or the phrasing. No. They just want to beat it until it tells it what it means. I still, even though I put poem on that slide, I told you it would be up there, I still didn't do it. There it is, right there we go. Now, the time it took, I said, was about 40 to 45 seconds. In my case, 43.82. That's not very long. What now? What did you say?
You really good, reading, because it was right in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm just
It was there.
I've done this a while.
That was your idea.
Did you try to make it take that time, or you just?
No, I didn't even look at the timer until I was done.
Do you have it memorized yet?
What?
Do you have it memorized?
No, not this one. I should. It's short enough. Let's see. How long were the short stories? Well, it took me about an hour and a half a piece, and that's with no distractions whatsoever. 6 hours if I had my phone. Probably most people reading it the first time, a news story for the first time, probably took about 2.5 hours, is my assumption. And if you had your phone, never. Now, if we look at this realistically, I may have to read this poem over and over again to get at its meaning. And we got it kind of after one reading, I think. But let's say I think about it for 15 seconds after every time I read it. Okay, 15 seconds plus the 45 makes it a minute. And let's just say, for some reason, that I'm just reading it in its entirety over and over again. I mean, I could read the poem 90 times at the same time I read one short story. So I really have plenty of time to approach it. Now, with that being the case, you're likely not going to, did I say this in the next slide? No. But you're not going to be in a situation where you have to read every poem 90 times. Granted, you may have to read Dover Beach quite a few times, or To His Coy Mistress, to figure out what's going on. But the other ones, at least in terms of discussion posts, you've got kind of an easy, approach for the rest of the semester because, as we saw with 30 people, Richard Cory was one that you could read and understand the meaning of fairly quickly, which is the vast majority of people who wrote about Richard Cory. Because it takes you, 5 minutes to read the thing, figure out what you think about it, maybe even less. And then the discussion post itself, you just have to get on there and say you know what it means, which I always prefer to have people make some sort of statement about, here's how I feel about what it meant. Hopefully I wasn't just getting somebody telling me the plot. It was a dude who was happy, we thought, who had everything. Then he killed himself. And then hopefully somebody said, so apparently he didn't have everything, or so it appeared to us. Some people were just saying, I think he shot himself. And I was like, well, that's pretty clear. So I went to a little something else. So you're not going to have to do that every time. So imagine you get on there, you read it, you make a statement, you're kind of done with it. And I think that's going to be how it goes for most of the poetry section. And then maybe, which I assume what most of you did was you read a poem, wrote the discussion post, and said, I'll come back to their poems later when I have the time.
That's what I did with the short stories.
With the short stories, and you had to do a lot more reading with the short stories too when you did that, because you still have to read a whole short story. I mean, you think about it, you have plenty of time to try to understand these. And you can put all your effort into the ones that don't make as much sense, like Dover Beach and To His Coy Mistress. That's probably going to be your best use of time. Now, let's talk about some suggestions to approach poetry to kind of make it a little easier on you to help understand, because there are some ways that we can look at it. The first section on each one of these is a paragraph from the book, or the paragraph is composed of words from the book, and down below is usually my addition. So one thing you should assume on every single poem is that it's going to need to be read more than once. That's just the nature of the design. They did it on purpose. Give yourself a chance to come through with what the poem has to offer. And it says like a piece of music, a poem becomes more pleasurable with each encounter, but if not more pleasurable, it's at least easier to understand. If it's not getting easier to understand, try going slower. If that doesn't work, try stopping each word to see how one relates to the other. But you shouldn't worry about if I don't get it the first time, I never will, because then you just kind of slow yourself down into getting what you can as you go. And that's going to be probably the case in these. Another suggestion, pay attention to the title. It will often provide helpful context for the poem and serve as an introduction to it. Larkin's A Study of Reading Habits is precisely what its title describes. So if you turn to page 601, look at Larkin's A Study of Reading Habits. And we can see this in action by the title. When getting my nose in a book cured most things short of school, it was worth ruining my eyes to know I could still keep cool and deal out the old right hook to dirty dogs twice my size. Later, with inch-thick specs, evil was just my lark. Me and my cloak and fangs had ripping times in the dark, the women I clubbed with sex. I broke them up like meringues. Don't read much now. The dude who lets the girl down before the hero arrives, the chap who's yellow and keeps the store, seem far too familiar. Get stewed. Books are a load of crap. So you're seeing it, and you're like, whoa, what? Like, that's very strange. So it was seemingly, when he's a kid, he reads apparently like things about punching bullies, or it seems like you're trying to be a good guy. And then it's like, okay, well now I'm reading about the more. It seems like he's gone a little more emo. Read about some dark vampire stuff. I guess it's more of a transgressive idea when you're in high school, learning about the things you're probably not supposed to be learning about. So he's reading stories that have, sex in them now. And then now that he's an adult, my assumption is he's kind of a work-a-day guy, work. I don't have time to read. They're full of crap anyway, all this, these stories, they're full of it. So he says, books are a load of crap. And now you see here at the top, the title is A Study of Reading Habits. So he's not necessarily saying, like, I'm the author, here's how I feel about this. He's saying, this is a study of what the reading habits are, probably a number of people. They start out and, whoa, books are fun. Then it's, books help me do the things I can't do in real life. And then I'm too busy working, I don't need to read books. And that's how it kind of goes for, a number of people.
Which is why I have an untouched library.
An untouched library? Yeah. I mean, we all have to work, and that's the problem is that we get so disenchanted with everything. We like, I have to work in the world. And has anybody had a chance to see Arrival? All of you are doing yourself a disservice.
A disservice or a service?
Basically, at least in terms of talking about this poem here and like what it, I don't know, I might want to go along, but this poem is the reason I've drawn this stick figure drawing in the background, so I at least got to come back to it at one point. And I think it might do it when I get to the narrator, but we'll see. Let me see. I want to do it here. So, a study of reading habits. I mean, a lot of people maybe feel this way about books, right? Maybe not anybody in this room, of course. But people feel this way about books. It's like, I work here. I shouldn't have to read books. But let me tell you, being an English teacher and reading these literary works all the time and explaining them to people and getting really deep into this stuff. I think it's very important that people pursue this stuff even after, because there's a lot of people I talk to, and I feel like there's something missing from their explanations of the world, their view of it. I feel like there's a limited scope, and I don't mean like politically, but they seem to look at the world and not find much Meaning, anybody seen that poster before that somebody said? It's basically an idea stolen from Jurassic Park, where he says you spent so much time thinking about whether or not you could that you never took the time to stop and think about whether or not you should. I think that's actually from the sample paper. It was Ian Malcolm talking about, well, maybe you should have thought more about whether or not you built this place of dinosaurs. There's this poster that somebody made that you can buy on the internet and put up in your school that says, I think sciences could teach us how to resurrect dinosaurs in our world today. The humanities would tell us why this would be a bad idea, which I thought was a pretty clever poster. It's got a picture of a dinosaur on it and everything, a little cartoon dinosaur. I think he's eating somebody. But the idea there is that I think that when you pursue things like history, philosophy, the arts, literature, you're giving yourself a greater understanding of the world. Has anybody ever heard of Plato's cave? Luke has. Anybody else heard of Plato's cave?
I don't know what it is.
By the way, Plato, not Plato. So it's not a cave made of Plato. So Plato's a philosopher, and he had this vision of a cave, right? So in this cave, pretend this guy doesn't exist yet, okay? He's not there.
Okay.
Let's say you have 3 people here in this cave. And if you want, you can imagine all of society is in this cave, but let's not do that. It's a little too complicated. So you have 3 people in this cave, okay? And each one of them is positioned where they cannot move, and they can only see what's directly in front of them on a wall. And what's in front of them on the wall is their own shadow, which is played from the sun coming into the cave and casting their shadow on the wall. That's all they can see. Now, essentially, Plato argued that the idea of looking at studying philosophy, the meaning of life, history, art, war, all those subjects that give us more knowledge about things and help understand our world a little bit better, what it means to be a human being, nature of good and evil, that kind of stuff, to study all that stuff constantly and consistently all the time, essentially lets us get free of these constraints. And then we turn around and we walk out and we look out the cave, and we're like at the cave entrance, and we see, holy crap, there's a whole world out here. There's so much more than is in the cave. And you can't get to the people, you can't get in front of them. There's something about the nature of the way the cave is built. But you say, guys, see how he's screaming, guys, outside there's this thing that's moving. And then there's this tall thing. And then this other thing that also is moving. But it doesn't move like the other thing. It moves like it's going somewhere on purpose. And then this other thing in the sky, I can't look at it. It hurts. But it's so different out here. You guys should see this. Over time, he'll probably start developing words like, oh, this river is flowing, and this tree is tall, and this deer looks kind of like us, but he's furry, and he's got a horn, or 2 of them. And then there's I'm going to call this the sun over here. Guys, there's so much out here. And he goes back in there, and he's trying to tell them, guys, there's this stuff outside. You got to see this. And what is their response?
I don't see it. I don't believe it.
Yeah, I don't see that. You're insane. There's none of that's out there. You just shut up. And I feel like that's how an English teacher feels all the time. Guys, there's such a world out there. There's so much to us to understand about the nature of reality and what it is to be us. Everybody's but I have to go to work every day. So what you say is irrelevant. I need to go to work and come home and watch my Kevin James sitcoms. And I need to listen to music that has this awesome chorus low, 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 and it's because I understand that. He's saying, I think, low. Right? I think that's what he's trying to get me to get out of that song. And you've been talking to the people all the time, and I hear my song about how it's so nice to get home every day and drink a beer, and drive down country roads. But granted, those things aren't nice. But there's so much more out there.
Were you going to say something about those colorblind glasses?
Yeah, this is essentially right here, the colorblind glass. Imagine being someone who is colorblind, and then you go put on the glasses to see colors for the first time. It's whoa, look at how much was in the world I didn't even know about. And people have told me it's there, but I really never had a concept for what it's like to have been there. Now, granted, we can't just read a book and suddenly go from being colorblind to not colorblind. Nor can we read a book and go from, did y'all know that there are some people who can see ultraviolet rays of light?
That's awesome.
Like there's not many, like it's a very, for some reason it's a trait that is not carried, I don't think it's genetically dominant, but some people can see ultraviolet light. So there's a spectrum of light that they can see with their eyes that we can't. So they've got yet another way of looking at reality that we do not have, which is,
Was it new colors?
I don't know. Like I don't even know if they have a way to explain it. I don't know that they necessarily give it colors. It's just they can see it. Like I've not heard a person describe it. I haven't seen that. I've seen where there was an article about it, but they didn't ask somebody, hey, you were able to do this. What do you see? Like it wasn't like that.
Even if they describe it, we wouldn't be able to understand what they're describing.
True. Like it's like, well, you know how, what am I gonna say? Like you know how a blanket's fuzzy, and sometimes when you rub it, it's like static. Well, it looks like that. You're like, what? Like, I'm having trouble with it. Like, yeah, that's the best I can do. Or, you know, like when you swish a glass of milk. Those two things are not the same. Like, no, it's like both of those things. I don't understand what you're talking about.
That frustrates me that there are people that can do that, but I can't.
Yeah, and did you know that there are some people too who cannot, you know how, like, okay, let's talk about it. You ever heard of, somebody say to their kids, all right, if you want to fall asleep, count sheep. Just, imagine, the fence, and then, like, count one sheep's jumping over the fence. And now here comes another sheep, he's jumping over the fence. And there's a third one, he's jumping. So you count sheep, and you count. You watch all of them go by in your head, and then you fall asleep. Well, I think it determined that there's something like 3 to 7% of people can't do that. I'm not talking about sleep specifically, but they cannot imagine things in their head. Like they don't visualize. When somebody describes the way something looks, they don't visualize it in their head. Like they can't create a mental picture. These people tend to be extremely well read and have excellent memories. But when asked to describe, a situation, it's always like all the ways that they think of, like, think about a time you went on vacation and what that place looked like. You were like, like a person who has that condition will say there was sand, there was a pier, it was very sunny, it was cold, but that's all just remembering qualities the place had. They don't actually think back and feel the feelings or look at the visions. Like that's just them recreating it based on stuff they know had to have been there. But like they have trouble, I think, sometimes with like putting names to faces because they can't. Like they'll know the names, but they won't know the faces. They're like, I don't know, like it had qualities, but I don't know what those qualities were. So those people experience the world, differently than we do, or the vast majority. I fall in the category that can do that thing. But a lot of us, would think, oh, that's really interesting that somebody has to do. But it's just like the Plato's Cave thing. Where it's like you'll have different layers of experience, and to convince somebody that you experience the world, not to its fullest extent, is an interesting, idea. To say, well, there's so much more out there, and somebody's like, I don't think so. I think I've got basically everything I need to have. It's never true. There's always more. Never be satisfied with the status quo.
It reminds me.
So that's what he's saying when books are a load of crap. Books are not really a load of crap. He's criticizing he's understanding, but he's also criticizing most people's reading habits. Yes?
It reminds me of that song on Aladdin.
A whole new world. A new horizon to pursue. No one to tell us no or where to go. And then some other words.
You did good.
Yeah.
What?
You did good.
You did good?
Most people wouldn't be able to recite that song very well.
Oh, I got 4 lines. That's all I got. That's it. Forward, suggestion 2. Let's go to 3. As you read the poem for the first time, avoid becoming entangled in words or lines you don't understand. So, like with Love Song and Shelford Proof Rock, that first time I ever read it, the best approach would be not to try to figure out what the Italian means the first time, but just to read the whole thing in English. Then go, okay, all right. Then go back and maybe read the Italian. Then start reading the thing again. Okay, what's the translation mean? Okay, something about an embarrassing story, but he actually told it to the guy, so I need to think that maybe this story he's telling me is an embarrassing story of his. Okay, so you start going into it and reading it with that idea in mind. And just understanding little bits at a time, but just don't get too caught up in the meanings of individual words and stuff that first couple of times through. Later you can. On the second reading, that's when you can identify any words or passages you don't understand. Like maybe you read Studying of Reading Habits and you're like, okay, I think I understand clubbed with sex, but I don't understand broke them up like meringues. What the heck does that even mean? And so you start looking at what a meringue is and trying to understand like how does one get broken up, and then you kind of start to make sense of what the image means. But it's not something to get hung up on the first time. Like you like clubbed with sex and then broke them up some way. That's got to mean a thing. And as you just kind of assume what that meaning is. Now, suggestion 5 is to read the poem aloud. The poem has its roots in song, so it's good to read poetry out loud. A lot of times it'll illuminate stuff, or you can give it like the emotional cadences it needs as you start to understand it more and more to kind of help it make sense. I like to do voices, as you can tell. Sometimes that helps. Do different voices for different characters, so that'll help you understand sometimes meanings for one person differently than it is for others. And understand, too, that not all poetry is meant to bounce. Not everything's meant to be read like Humpty Dumpty. Or the mouse ran off the clock. You know, like hickory, hickory, dickory, dock. Not everything is meant to be read that way. So let's take a look at Those Winter Sundays on 591. And I'll read that one. And listen to the way it's different than the next poem I'll read, which is called Catch. So Those Winter Sundays was written in 1962 by Robert Hayden. Those Winter Sundays. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday, weather made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call. And slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So that has more of a, almost like a fiction style reading to it, where it's just very serious and calm, talking about not appreciating his father. Then we go over to Catch, which is a couple pages over on 596, and that's by Robert Francis, written in 1950. The poem Catch goes, and I'm going to start reading it the exact same way I started reading Those Winter Sundays, but it's not going to last because I'll realize after a minute or so that, or a couple of lines, that it's just not meant to be read the same way. Two boys uncoached are tossing a poem together. Overhand, underhand, backhand, sleight of hand, every hand, teasing with attitudes, latitudes, interludes, altitudes, high, make him fly off the ground for it. Low, make him stoop, make him scoop it up. Make him as almost as possible, miss it. Fast, let him sting from it. Now fool him slowly. Anything, everything, tricky, risky, nonchalant, anything under the sun to outwit the prosy. Over the tree in the long sweet cadence down. Over his head, make him scramble to pick up the meaning, and now like a posy, a pretty one, plump in his hands. So that one reads a lot different. I mean, that one's about two kids playing catch, and it's using the words to sort of emulate the goofy, random nature of playing catch. You're trying to, do you remember playing catch when you were younger? And it's a little different than these days. Like if I'm an adult and I'm like just throwing the ball around with like my brother or something, I'm just trying to hit him right in the chest with a glove every time. Like I'm just throwing that same spot. You know, I want to smack that same spot. That's what feels challenging as an adult, is can I keep hitting that same spot in the glove over and over again? Whereas a kid, you're kind of a jerk, right? I mean, you're like, you throw it normal one time, but then another time you're like, oh, throw away in the air. We'll catch it, you know, the grounder, you know, or throw me over here. You see, can you get, you know? So we're just kind of trying to mess with each other at that point. And then maybe too, even when you're getting a little older, I don't know, something about 8th grade, 9th grade, you throwing a ball at each other, you're like trying to throw fastballs and curve balls if you can, just as hard as you can at the person's face and making them catch it. There's just something about like a kind of intimidation factor, but there's always that like playfulness of trying to make somebody live up to the types of throws that you're giving. And that's kind of what he's saying building a poem is. You're trying to have somebody live up to the construction that you're putting forth in this poem. So they read a lot differently. Those Winter Sundays are meant to be serious and almost somber about not appreciating his dad enough, which I'm sure we all have felt now or will feel in the future. One day, like, man, I didn't appreciate my dad. There's somebody in our lives we didn't appreciate enough, who provided us stuff that we didn't, do enough with. And if that's not the case for you, if you provide everything for yourself, someday somebody's not going to appreciate you, and you'll be the subject of the story instead of the actor. So, suggestion 6 says read the punctuation. Poems use punctuation marks in addition to space on the page as signals for readers, and not just in normal ways that punctuation are used. I mean, there are normal ways, but it's not always that way. So we see periods and commas and exclamation marks, question marks in poetry, even things like apostrophes and parentheses, that can actually have meaning, and actually more so meaning than they would normally have, say, in fiction. The extreme example I'm going to use, which you probably saw what I erased before I erased it, but still. Do I have my marker? There it is. My marker. So here we have a poem called L'(A) by E.E. Cummings. No, not apostrophe. L parenthesis A. Open parenthesis A. L open parenthesis A. And the next line is LE. The next line is AF. The next line is FA.
What's that X?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I see.
FA. And then we have a next stanza after that is LL. Next line is S close parenthesis. Then the word one. Then another single L. And then a stanza break, and then INESS. Ines.
Is this the poem?
This is the poem. Latin. So this is confusing, I would say. Now, can anybody look at this and see if there's anything here that can be read? One. What?
Or L, that's right, yeah.
L? Oh, the L?
Yeah, no wonder.
What about illness?
Oh, and by the way, this is an I.
Okay, that's what I.
Oh, it's an I?
Yeah.
I mean, that's confusing. That is, yeah.
Yeah, my bad. I forgot the dot.
It's like a tall.
What does it say?
Dang.
Can it be read?
You should really not try to interpret too deep.
What if you just read it in order?
Yeah.
Do you see anything that if you just read those letters in order like their actual phrase, like what would happen?
La.
You say Aflac?
Let fall someone or
A leaf falls, you say, Alex? Yeah. A leaf falls, and that's inside the parentheses. And what's on the outside of the parentheses? Anything there?
One.
No, you said that it's an L there.
Yeah, that there's an L.
Illness.
What?
Illness.
Illness?
Yeah.
It's close. There's a word that ends in ness.
Loneliness.
Loneliness.
There we go.
So we have loneliness, and in the middle of loneliness, we have a leaf falls.
Makes sense.
Huh.
I mean, what does that really? What does that mean? I mean, like, I don't know, but part of what helps me, I think this is more meant to be almost like where the poem is not functioning so much in like song form, because you notice whole reading out loud doesn't really help us here. That doesn't really sounding out what the words are that are in there. That does help quite a bit, because I think that loneliness and a leaf falls, there's got to be some way we can link those. But you see that the punctuation here is odd, a parenthesis. Now I have a theory for the punctuation. My punctuation theory is that it tells us about actual physical motions. So I see this here, and the reason I had this little X drawn between the two F's and the A's earlier is because I find it interesting that you have an A's that are diagonal from each other and F's that are diagonal from each other. And that to me almost signifies a type of motion.
Oh, that's cool.
Then I have these two L's that almost seem like, to me, L's seem like a track, like drop down quick. So I can like drop. And then I've got down there at the bottom is the longest portion of the entire thing. But just above that I have the second longest portion. So it's almost like it flattens out and then settles completely. And I have yet another straight line that's there. So what happens for me is I see the motion of a leaf falling. I see, oh, it falls off the tree, starts looping. Oh, then it does a little loop in the midair. Then it
Falls.
I don't really have a curve yet, so I'm gonna have to add a curve here. So let's see. Let me move all the stuff that I had. And then I've got like a straight drop I said right here. So it kind of goes shoo and then takes a curve, flattens out, then loops and falls on the ground.
Oh, that makes sense.
So it's like the motion of a leaf falling shown by the punctuation. Now,
Yeah.
you can see we might say that, see this little ball of paper here? We might say this is a lonely paper. And that's probably true, but there's not a whole lot of interesting. I mean, think about how uninteresting this story is. Watch this character go through his entire arc. Boy, that was nothing. Ball drops immediately to the ground. That's not a story any of us can read, right?
Frogs fall out of my eye.
But if we this is my simulation of the motion of a leaf. It's just a small piece of paper, flat piece of paper. If we drop that, I guess I need to drop it probably like this. And we let it go, woo, loop-de-doop-de-dee, woo! Kind of like the drawing up there, right? So it functions a little bit like a leaf, but that's a much more interesting fall than just, oh, this bypasses the error resistance a little bit, and then who cares? This is way more interesting because we see it go through almost like this cascade of loops and craziness, until it finally hits the bottom. Was that what the feather was supposed to be a metaphor for in Forrest Gump? I'm just now thinking about this.
I think so.
Which
That's
feather?
what his life was like.
His life just floats on the wind, and it goes to different places now. Whereas it could have gone straight down, like, oh, he's a kid who's got a pretty low IQ, and his legs don't work the same way as everybody else's.
But he can run.
Put him in a home. Like that's how probably a lot of those stories go. Just bloop, we don't know what to do with them. Send it down a straight hole. But then he took more of the feather path, where his life went through lots of crazy ups and downs. If you think about it, he's saying, we've got the leaf falling, but that's within loneliness. So if you think about the nature of a leaf falling off the tree, right? It's up there with all these other leaves, and they're doing fine. But then it just breaks, and it goes through all this like cascade of loneliness and like depression and the ups and downs of that, and then flat lines at the bottom. That kind of, I guess, is what loneliness feels like. Yeah, it doesn't sound very fun. E.E. Cummings, jerk.
Press.
Sure.
Where is this?
How dare
In
you
the
make
book?
us so sad?
What
Yeah,
page is this?
it's on 603.
Oh,
So yeah, what a weird poem.
what in the world?
It gives us a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So let's see, suggestion 7. Paraphrase the poem to determine whether you understand what happens in it. Now it's a little more difficult with something like this, which I think functions more like an image than it does an actual story. But I mean, what's the story of Richard Cory? Paraphrase that for me.
He's a rich guy, he looks good, he has it all, and everyone thinks he's happy, and then he kills himself.
Wealthy guy, looks good. Exactly. Wealthy guy, looks good, has it all, kills himself. Now the meaning is separate from that. The meaning is something you add to it. You're like, okay, well, it seems to be implied that now the two main ones I saw, which I don't like this because they were slang essentially, but not slang, but cliches. When the student said, well, it says not to judge a book by its cover. Which I don't like, the cliche version of that. I think it should be, we should not assume, that everything is as it appears on the surface. There's something deeper to that, which is the same way of saying that, but different. Also, money doesn't buy happiness, as other people said. Which you could say, just because somebody has all the privileges of life doesn't mean that they're going to be happy with those privileges. Which is a better probably way of saying it, because people tend to ignore cliches. There's just something about it. You hear a cliche and your brain goes, oh yeah. Like you might even think about it, but if it sounds like a cliche, you're like, man, they just don't baste the turkey. You're like, I know, doesn't baste the turkey at all. What? Like, what's that mean? It was like, I don't know, but what, I love there's this whole sketch by Dave Chappelle where he explains that he liked to have fun with his, he was talking about he has white lawyers. And he said that he likes to have fun with his lawyers, like he'll do send-offs on phone calls where he'll just make them feel uncomfortable and think that they've heard some black slang that they don't know. And he says, he said, like, he ended this phone call and he said, all right, bud, thanks, lawyer. Talk to you later. So zip it in and zip it out. And the lawyer was like, okay, zippity-doo-dah, bye. He's like, I just assume that that's just some cliche, I don't know.
I was texting my sister last night, and I said,
She said the
cool.
same thing.
I said, cool to something, and she was like, whip, and I was like,
What?
and
Chances are
I
she
asked her
actually
about
said
it later, and
whip.
she was just cool whip, and I was like, oh my gosh.
No, whip.
I texted her back, no, watch me name it, because I thought that's what she was saying.
It's cool whip.
And then I was like, is it cool?
Cool whip. Why did you do that like that? So let's see. Yeah, cool. Yeah, what?
Oh,
Did you say husky?
No, I said whiskey.
Oh, yeah. Whiskey. You know what really drives me nuts is the real way you spell whiskey is with just a Y and not an EY.
Oh, really?
The Scottish spell it that way.
My Achilles heel is spelling.
Yeah. I like to experiment with different spellings, especially if I don't like the existing one. I don't like that funner is supposedly not a word. I don't understand why.
Yeah, it should be a word.
In fact, if you look it up in the dictionary, it says funner and funnest.
Apparently,
more fun
grey
than
can
that.
be
It's the
spelled
most fun.
G-R-E-Y and G-R-A-Y.
People have said that G-R-E-Y is the British spelling and that G-R-A-Y is the American. I prefer to think of it as anytime I see a solid pastel-looking color of gray, that's G-R-A-Y. But anytime I see like a heathered gray, where it's like flecks of multiple different colors of white and black mixed together to create a mosaic-like gray, like a more distinguished gray, like the gray of someone's like
Hair.
beard,
Yeah.
where it's like a white and black mixed up. I don't know. To me, that's G-R-E-Y. Maybe that's just me distinguishing between classy British and
Nice.
What
simple
about
American. I don't know.
G-R-A-E, huh?
That sounds like a fairy character from a fantasy novel. Right. Let's see. So if you can paraphrase, you probably know what's going on, but just don't ignore things that aren't convenient for your paraphrase. Like, I don't know what this Italian is, so I'll just ignore this. And, you know, later when you're making the paraphrase, you probably should have a place for the Italian and what that's supposed to be. Now, suggestion 8, try to get a sense of who's speaking, what the setting or situation is. Don't assume the speaker is the author. It often is a created character. I think I got some other examples here, but the best example is probably, if you think back to the beginning of the semester when I showed you that poem about a snake. That poem was written by Emily Dickinson, but the narrator of that poem was a boy. And I believe most popular accounts say that Emily Dickinson herself was female. This is, I believe, prior to the gender identity movement, though, so it's very possible she might identify as male these days. You never know. I do think that she, in college, liked to attend parties dressed as a guy, but I think that was just to make people uncomfortable because she liked doing that. I can't remember that. Don't trust me on that story that I just told. That might have been debunked. I'm not sure, but I think that there were pictures that surfaced of her dressing as a male to go to college parties in Amherst. I think I could be making that up. I really hope I'm not. But it's very possible that my grasp of reality as I get older is getting looser and looser. I do want to take us to 1066, though, I believe it is, where I want to show you the importance of not trusting an authorial entity in a poem and not thinking that it's the author. If you look at 1066, it's a poem called Ozymandias by Percy Shelley, written in 1818. First, I should tell you that Ozymandias was another name for Ramses II, an Egyptian king, and I believe that they actually thought they were gods at the time. And this poem goes, I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk. A shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that a sculptor well knows passions fed which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone level sands stretch far away. So what we'd have here is a king who considers himself a god, wanting to relay a message to the future generations that would follow. And he makes that message clear through a sculptor who sculpted him, who is now being seen centuries later by a traveler who has seen it and relays that information to the narrator, who is written by the author. We have 5 layers of different narrators going on here, if you think about it. The king wants to say what he wants to say, but the sculptor wants to say what he wants to say. Traveler's telling us what he wants to tell us, to the narrator, who may or may not exist. And then you've got the poet. I mean, the poet could be the narrator, could not be the narrator, depends. And I think that one of the reasons we confuse narrators for the poet more so than we do with fiction, I think it's easier to maybe go, oh, with a lawyer, that's not the same as Melville, because Melville was not a lawyer. But we look at a poem and we think, oh, okay, well, that's the poet. Anybody know why we might do that? I have a theory. Have you ever written poems before? Anybody tried to write a poem before? It doesn't have to be recent. Have you ever tried to write a poem?
I have a couple.
A couple? Tried to write, yeah? I wrote most of my poems I ever wrote before middle school. Or like in middle school. Did you ever write poems with like some narrator in mind?
Yeah.
It's always you, isn't it? I think that's something that we just... Songs always seem to be sung from the perspective of the person who's singing it. And additionally, poems seem to come from the person who's written them, because we feel like those are meant to be emotional expressions of the speaker, and the easiest way to do that's often just to express ourselves. But the old poets were, very experimental with that kind of stuff, and shoot, new poets are too, where they come up with speakers that are the ones, expressing the poetry, not necessarily meant to be the poets themselves. They might not feel that way at all, nor have those words. But it's something to keep in mind with poetry. There's no way that we should know, because it's the love song of Geoffrey Prufrock. That Prufrock himself is meant to be a stand-in for Eliot. That's not necessarily the case. Suggestion 9, assume that each element in the poem has a purpose. Try to figure out how they work together. So, like I said, don't ignore the Italian, because you're like, I don't know what the Italian means here in love songs, so I'll just ignore it. Look at what the translation is in the book and think, okay, now that I know that, I can incorporate it. Be generous. Be willing to entertain perspectives, values, experiences, and subjects that you might not agree with or approve of. I don't like the example that I have there. Don't let your preferences determine whether it's not something is good or bad. I know that there's all kinds of different poems on subjects that you might be uncomfortable with. I can't think of any right now. There's one later, I think it's called Dulce et Decorum Est, which is about as close as I can get to this with the poetry we're reading. But it's a poem about war and how war is very dark, and you see your friends die in gruesome ways. And it says you wouldn't think that war is such a great thing, or that it's so sweet and fitting to be a military person if you saw your friend die from chemical warfare. And somebody might read that poem and go, this poem is no good, because this guy is obviously not a patriot of his country. He sounds more like a traitor. Yeah, but it doesn't mean the poem's not good, just because you don't like the subject. Which is a mistake that this is probably an easier way I have of talking about this. Has anybody had a chance to see the film Brokeback Mountain before? Not a lot of people have watched it. But there's something about the idea in the South of cowboys being gay. It's something like, if you see two people who are gay who you would expect, oh, that might be a profession where people could be gay. It seems to be easier to see that in a movie than to, watch two cowboys, a cowboy, a southern cowboy. There's something that made people really uncomfortable about watching two cowboys have a gay relationship in a film. And you watch that film, and you may not like, the idea of gay marriage. You may not, or just gay relationships in general. They make you uncomfortable. But to watch the film and say the film sucks because the subject matter is not something pleasing to me, that's unfair. I've actually watched the movie, and it's really good. Like, it's a beautiful film. Did it make me uncomfortable first time I watched it? Yeah, because I mean, my church has its particular views on that, and so I didn't see a lot of that growing up. So it was new for me when I saw it. But the film itself is gorgeous. Like, it's a well-made film. The storytelling's great. And if anybody were to take and if they were uncomfortable with it, put a girl in one of the places that the guy just watches like a straight, I guess, love story between a man and a woman, you'd be like, oh, what a beautiful film. It's like Titanic or something. But people will judge it based purely on its subject matter and not the skillfulness of its storytelling. And people will do that with poetry as well when it talks about subjects they disagree about. Try developing a coherent approach to the poem that helps you to shape a discussion of the text. So there are critical strategies for reading later in the book on page 1641. And these are different types of ways that you can read stories and poems that will give you new perspectives on them. There's a number of different schools of literary analysis that have come out over the centuries, and here are some of them. Formalist is the one you're familiar with. That's just like paying attention to diction and the elements of fiction, like symbolism, those sorts of things. It's like looking at things to the most traditional English ways of looking at things. Biographical, though, that's where you would look at the biography of the person who's written it and then try to link maybe stuff that's happening in the poem to the biography of the person. So you might look at Robert Hayden in Those Winter Sundays and say, okay, well, let's look at his life and what he went through. And I believe he was African American, but I may be wrong about that. And like, how does that change your understanding of what this poem means? Historical, like what was going on when he wrote the poem in 1964, was it, did I say? For Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays? Or 62? 62. I might look at the psychological aspects. I might do a feminist reading, and I read it and I say, that's quite interesting that he's talking about the dad waking up and doing everything for the family, and he seems to be a young boy in the poem. Or maybe it's assumed it's a young boy, but there's no mention of females in that poem. What does that mean? You may do a feminist reading of it and determine that, I didn't realize that there was no female representation in that poem, but now I do. So there's different ways to approach that might give you a different perspective on the stuff that you're reading. Again, don't expect to produce a definitive reading. Don't beat the poem with a hose. Experience the poem. Don't beat it with a hose. And those are some different things that might help you approach poetry in a way that might not be as confusing. I mean, granted, it still will probably be confusing sometimes, but hopefully it won't be so confusing. You have a great day. You too.